Have you ever noticed someone who carefully measures every word they say, apologizes for things they never actually did, or avoids eye contact as if just one glance could make them close up? To an outsider, these behaviors can seem confusing, even a bit excessive. But if you pause for a moment, you'll realize they are often the quiet traces of emotional wounds, scars that don't appear on the skin, but carve themselves deeply into the way a person responds to the world. All of it forms a steady, silent exhaustion no one else can see, but inside, it weighs like stone. And from those experiences, the behaviors that seem strange from the outside suddenly make perfect sense. They are not bad habits, nor signs of weakness, but survival mechanisms shaped over many years of tiptoeing around someone whose emotions shifted without warning, who demanded compliance, who made them doubt even their own perceptions. Because after living beside a woman with narcissistic tendencies, someone who can turn emotions into weapons, turn affection into pressure, and turn intimacy into a means of control, the world begins to feel different. It becomes less predictable, sharper, colder. Survivors move through each day with a mind on alert, a heart folded inward, and emotions tucked away as if protecting whatever fragile part of them is still unbroken. To them, no sentence feels truly neutral anymore. Everything must be interpreted. And of course, to someone who has never lived through such chaos, these reactions may look like oversensitivity, but in truth, they are the natural aftermath of having survived unpredictable anger, sudden emotional shifts, and manipulation powerful enough to make them doubt their own inner reality. Because when a person has been gaslit repeatedly, trusting someone's words becomes a luxury they can no longer afford. The mind, rather than resting, begins to scan the environment constantly, like a radar that never switches off. They listen more deeply than necessary, observe more intensely than intended, and analyze signals others would never notice. Over time, this vigilance turns into an automatic reflex, understanding that this is a learned survival skill, not a flaw in their character, is the very first step toward releasing the layer of tension that has clung to them for far too long. And as we continue tracing the emotional aftermath left behind by manipulation, another pattern quickly comes into view: the second behavior, emotional masking. For those who once lived under the shadow of a narcissistic relationship, expressing emotion was never safe. Instead, they learned to build a mask, a forced smile when they are exhausted, a calm facade when their heart is trembling, a neutral expression to protect the chaos unfolding inside. And truly, they are not cold as they may appear, rather, they have paid too high a price for every moment of emotional honesty. In an environment where any expression of the heart could be mocked, twisted, or used as ammunition against them, the brain had no choice but to lock things away. It is no longer a conscious choice, but a survival mechanism operating beneath awareness. And even after leaving the harmful relationship, the sense of danger doesn't simply evaporate. The body carries the memory of fear long after the threat is gone. That is why they continue to live as though something could shift at any moment: a door slamming, a tone of voice changing, or a single glance tightening into criticism. When they felt sad, they were labeled weak. When they were angry, they were called unreasonable. When they were anxious, their feelings were dismissed as unimportant. So every sorrow, every fear, every disappointment was pushed down into a corner they hardly dared to revisit. Over the years, this suppression no longer remained a choice, it became an automatic reflex. Around strangers, the mask thickens. In crowds, it tightens. And sometimes they themselves cannot tell where their true feelings end, and the mask they've worn for so long begins. What matters most is this: none of it is their fault. It is simply the natural outcome of living in a world where vulnerability equates to danger. Once we understand that emotional concealment is not weakness but a survival strategy, we begin to see them with more compassion. In that space, no one erupts in anger because an object was placed in the wrong spot. No one uses disorder as a reason to shame them. No one changes the rules just to keep them off balance. Every item placed carefully back in its place, becomes a gentle reminder that they still have some ownership over their life. After years of living in an environment where someone else's emotions could shift without warning, they naturally develop a habit of creating order in even the smallest details. A perfectly aligned table, a pillow adjusted over and over, or a spotless room, all of these become their way of rebuilding a sense of stability that life once stripped away. In a narcissistic relationship, they lived within constantly changing rules. Something praised today could be harshly criticized tomorrow. That unpredictability made them feel as though they were walking through fog, never knowing what awaited them next. And because people became impossible to predict, they turned to what could be predictable: their physical space. Their constant cleaning, arranging, and structuring isn't irrational perfectionism. It is their attempt to create a world they can understand, hold on to, and momentarily feel safe within. These rituals may seem unreasonable from the outside, but they carry profound meaning. They are the body's attempt to self-soothe, a sign that the person once lived in a world where safety was never guaranteed. The goal is not to force these behaviors to disappear, but to understand that they were once lifelines, strategies that helped them survive their darkest moments. Only when safety becomes a consistent experience will these rituals naturally fade, making space for the peace they have always deserved. There are certain things that only appear after someone has endured long enough. A quiet urge to step away from the crowd, as if silence is the only place gentle enough to hold them. And that is behavior 5, seeing solitude as a sanctuary. As if the years of tension carved a message deep into their bones. Be ready, stay alert, protect yourself before it's too late. So checking the lock is not merely about keeping intruders out. It is their way of reminding themselves that their boundaries still matter, that the door to that painful past is truly closed. Each turn of the key, each extra glance at the door, becomes a quiet whisper. I am safe now. And sometimes, simply seeing that sense of order is enough for them to breathe a little easier, slow down for a moment, and remember that not everything out there is as chaotic as what they once endured. There is something people rarely notice. When someone has lived in fear for too long, they don't just carry memories, they carry the habits that once kept them alive. And that is why behavior 4, safety rituals, checking and rechecking, begins to appear. Not because they fear people, but because they have grown accustomed to being judged, controlled, or told that their feelings were too much. Being alone, eating alone, walking alone, spending time with themselves becomes one of the few places that feels genuinely safe. In a narcissistic relationship, every preference, every choice, every small desire could be dismissed or scrutinized. Small actions, checking the lock again and again, closing the door repeatedly, scanning the room to ensure everything is exactly right, are not signs of irrational obsession. They are the result of a nervous system shaped by prolonged vigilance, where any sound, glance, or subtle shift could once signal an emotional explosion they were powerless to stop. Even after leaving the toxic relationship, their body still holds the imprint of old fear. Only in the quiet can they tune into their real needs buried for far too long beneath layers of manipulation, and in those solitary moments, they slowly find their way back to themselves. More importantly, this solitude is not a sign of unhealed pain, but the beginning of healing itself. They are learning to choose themselves, to let their emotions exist without punishment, and to build a world where their presence does not need to be justified. Strangely enough, there are wounds that never bleed, yet they silence a person more powerfully than pain ever could. And that is when behavior 6, difficulty talking about the past, becomes unmistakably clear. It's not that they don't remember, it's not that they refuse to share, it's that whenever their words come close to touching an old memory, something inside tightens, turning sentences into fragments and thoughts into pauses. Over time, the brain learned that silence was safer than honesty. So when someone now asks about what they went through, their body reacts before their mind can. The throat tightens, words catch, the heart races. It's as if speaking of the past reactivates the trauma embedded deep inside them. This is not weakness, this is the mark of someone who had to carry far too much alone. It sounds polite, but beneath it lies the deepest imprint of emotional abuse. They were once made to believe that they were always the problem. In a narcissistic relationship, anything could be twisted into their fault: a tense conversation, an emotion expressed at the wrong moment, or a simple inability to meet ever-changing expectations. Over time, they learn to take the blame as a survival tactic. If I apologize first, maybe their anger won't explode. Their voice softens, their story falters, or they simply stare into the distance, unsure where to begin. In a narcissistic relationship, they grew used to having their feelings dismissed, their pain minimized, and their truth twisted so severely that they stopped trusting their own experiences. Each time they spoke up, they were mocked. Each time they expressed fear, they were belittled. And each time they tried to explain, they were shut down with sarcasm or blame. What must be understood is this: struggling to speak does not mean they do not want to, but that they have never had a space safe enough for their truth to be spoken without being twisted into shame. Only when they find the right person, the right moment, the right kind of listening, can those tightly locked memories begin to loosen. And that is why, in this video, we'll gently peel back the layers of these quiet behaviors, the responses shaped over many years of walking softly and breathing carefully around someone who never truly saw them. Because sometimes, simply understanding where these reactions come from is the very first step for someone to reclaim their peace and for you to recognize the things you may have overlooked within your own heart. And as we continue following the emotional thread from the introduction, the first pattern that emerges quiet but unmistakable is the first behavior: living in a state of constant alertness. After enduring so much emotional instability, both the body and the mind become conditioned to stay on guard. Ordinary conversations, which once felt harmless, slowly turn into subtle examinations. Every compliment, every gentle reassurance, even a casual remark can trigger suspicion. What we need to understand is this: excessive apologizing is not weakness, but a sign of someone who has spent too long carrying the emotional weight of others. As they slowly learn that they are not responsible for every discomfort in the room, they begin reclaiming not just their voice, but their dignity. And sometimes, the simple act of saying, "No, this wasn't my fault," becomes a quiet but powerful milestone, one that marks the beginning of their emotional freedom. It is the moment when a single misplaced glance could trigger arguments, anger, or cutting remarks that drained them completely. After countless encounters with eyes filled with suspicion, disdain, or threat, their brain learned a simple rule: avoid the gaze to stay safe. So when they look down, glance away, or stare into empty space instead of your eyes, they are not avoiding you. They are avoiding the memories, avoiding the moments when a gaze became a weapon, avoiding the feeling of being exposed, analyzed, or diminished in an instant. What matters is this: they do not want to stay this way forever. Many of them long for genuine connection, long for the ability to look into someone's eyes without flinching. But healing never begins with force, it begins with safety. Only when they feel the person in front of them is not a threat, when they are heard instead of judged, when they are seen with kindness instead of scrutiny, only then will their eyes start to return. And sometimes, the moment they dare hold someone's gaze for just a heartbeat longer is enough to show how far they've come from where they once stood. Curiously, some fears never make a sound, yet you can see them clearly in the way someone hesitates before speaking their opinion. Sometimes, all it takes is noticing how someone avoids your eyes to understand what their words could never express, and that is behavior 8, avoiding eye contact. It's not because they lack confidence. It's not because they're being rude. It's because, in their life, eye contact once carried too much judgment, sarcasm, and cold scrutiny from a narcissistic partner. To them, eye contact is no longer connection, it is a warning signal. And that is behavior 9, Anxiety when expressing personal views. It's not that they lack knowledge. It's not that they have nothing to say. It's that, deep down, they have learned to associate speaking up with danger, with criticism, mockery, or conflict waiting just around the corner. In a narcissistic relationship, every time they expressed a thought, they were told they were wrong. Whenever they shared an emotion, they were dismissed as irrational. And more importantly, they too can start seeing themselves with gentleness because no one deserves to be judged for surviving in the only way they knew how. Strangely enough, when you listen to the stories of people who have been deeply hurt, you'll notice a very clear pattern emerge. The third behavior: keeping everything orderly to feel safe, as if they must hold the outside together because the inside has once been far too fragile. Because of this, their brain learned to interpret compliments as a soft trap, something that could pull them into obligation or make them easier to control. They didn't learn to trust praise, they learned to fear it. So when someone sincerely tells them they did well, that they are kind, that they are worthy, you may see them withdraw, deflect, or rush to diminish themselves. It's not that they don't want to believe it, it's that belief has been a wound. This anxiety is not weakness. It is the imprint of someone who was silenced too many times until using their voice became an act of courage. And the goal is not to force them to speak more, but to offer a space where their words are not dismissed, a place where their thoughts are received as something valuable, not something threatening. They are not used to being seen with respect, they are used to being scrutinized or exploited. The painful truth is, they have grown so familiar with feeling not enough that genuine validation feels foreign. But the hopeful truth is, the ability to receive praise can heal. As they enter safer, healthier relationships, where compliments are not tools but truths, they slowly learn to let their heart open to them, just a little and then a little more. And that is behavior 10. Feeling uneasy when receiving compliments. It sounds paradoxical, but for survivors of narcissistic abuse, compliments are not linked to appreciation. They are tied to suspicion, tension, and memories of manipulation. In a narcissistic relationship, praise was rarely genuine. It came with conditions. It carried an agenda. It was offered only when the narcissist wanted something or needed leverage. When they managed to voice even a small opinion, share a personal thought, or contribute a hesitant sentence to a conversation, it marks a huge step in their healing, even if no one else notices. Because for them, speaking without fear of being torn apart is a quiet but profound victory. There are moments that make you pause and realize that even praise, something meant to soothe the heart, can become a source of discomfort. And whenever they tried to explain themselves, the narcissistic partner twisted their words until they felt confused, foolish, or guilty. Over time, their brain learned one lesson: silence is safer. So now, when they try to speak, their body reacts before their mind does. The heart races, breathing shortens, hands turn cold, and their thoughts scramble. To outsiders, it looks like shyness. But to them, it is the echo of a past where speaking meant risking emotional harm. They are evidence of survival, reflexes shaped by a world where safety was fragile and unpredictable. And the truth is this: none of these behaviors are permanent. They can soften, they can change, they can fade as the person carrying them finally finds a safer place to stand. Healing is real, not a hollow promise, but a journey that can be seen, felt, and touched little by little. They were pressured to fit someone else's mold until they forgot what they once liked, wanted, or believed about themselves. So when they finally step out of that toxic environment, solitude is no longer emptiness. It becomes a breath of air, a space where they can hear their own inner voice, the one they once silenced to avoid conflict. To outsiders, this may look like withdrawal or isolation, but for them, it is restoration. Well, when you look back at all those seemingly strange behaviors, the hypervigilance, the emotional masks, the extreme neatness, the safety rituals, the longing for solitude, the difficulty speaking about the past, the constant apologizing, the avoidance of eye contact, the anxiety when expressing opinions, And the discomfort with receiving compliments, you begin to see that none of these are flaws. And eventually, a day will come when they no longer push praise away, but instead can smile softly and say something quiet yet powerful. Thank you. I think I deserve that. And in those moments when they manage to say even a single sentence, it is a quiet victory, a small but vital step toward reclaiming their voice and the worth they were once made to doubt. There are reflexes so subtle that they reveal an entire history of suffering, and behavior 7, excessive apologizing, is one of them. You'll see them apologize for interrupting a conversation, apologize when someone else bumps into them, even apologize simply for taking up space. And so sorry became their invisible shield, the instinct they leaned on to avoid the kind of emotional blow that once left them shaken for days. But the trouble is, even after leaving the toxic relationship, the reflex stays. They continue to apologize when nothing is wrong, as if their body hasn't realized that the danger is gone. Each unnecessary apology is a small echo of a past where their very existence was treated like an inconvenience. And above all, you deserve a life no longer led by fear, but guided by your truest self, strong, worthy, and whole. With the right support, with relationships that truly listen, with environments that no longer echo old fears, and especially with the gentleness you offer yourself, each behavior can gradually return to its natural, healthier form. Every small step holding eye contact for a moment longer, accepting a compliment without shrinking, expressing a need without trembling is a quiet but meaningful victory. You deserve safety. You deserve peace.